Roy Keane didn't join Man United, one broken promise in 1993 created Manchester United's greatest legend. While everyone remembers Roy Keane as United's iron-fisted enforcer, few ask the more shocking question. What if this legendary captain had never worn red at all? What if one broken handshake had sent him to Blackburn instead, creating the most dominant partnership the Premier League has ever seen? Today, we're diving into one of football's most mind-bending what-ifs, and trust me, by the end of this, you'll be questioning everything you thought you knew about the Premier League era. Before we get to the mental transfer drama, let's set the scene. Roy Keane, born in Cork on August 10th, 1971, wasn't your typical future superstar. Working-class family, smaller than most kids his age, but with this mad determination that showed early on. He joined a boxing gym after getting into scraps at school and actually won every competitive match he entered, probably the first sign of that fighting spirit that would later terrify Premier League players. Here's the mad bit though. When he wanted to make it in England, he wrote to 92 different clubs asking for a trial. 92. Only Nottingham Forest bothered to respond, and they signed him for £47,000 in 1990. From Rockmount to Co-Bramblers to Forest, not exactly the glamorous pathway most stars follow. At Forest under Brian Clough, Keane transformed into the midfielder we'd come to know. In 3 years, he made 114 appearances, scored 22 goals, and developed that gritty, no-nonsense style. This was the environment where Keane learned what it meant to be a proper professional. He previously stated that he was once punched in the face by his coach at the time after making a mistake that led to a goal. But then Forest got relegated in 1993.
Sorry I've lost today, obviously, but I am happy. I'm a happy man. Happiness comes with inside.
Triggering Keane's release clause. Suddenly, this wasn't just some promising Irish lad anymore. This was a proven Premier League midfielder who'd been moulded by one of football's most demanding managers. Enter Blackburn Rovers, who thought they'd hit the jackpot. Jack Walker was throwing money around like confetti. They had Alan Shearer banging in goals, and Kenny Dalglish was building something special. The offer was mental for 1993, around £3.5 to £4 million, plus £400,000 a year in wages. But here's the crucial bit. Keane had given Dalglish his word. Not just a casual, yeah, sounds good. We're talking about a proper handshake deal. And this is Roy Keane we're talking about, a man who took everything seriously. He later said, "Nobody does this to Kenny Dalglish. We shook hands on the deal." The move seemed done and dusted. Keane was going to be wearing blue and white stripes, forming what could have been one of the most lethal partnerships in Premier League history with Shearer. But wait, there's more to this story that'll make your head spin. But here's where it gets juicy. What if that weekend had gone completely differently? What if those offices had stayed open, the paperwork had gone through smoothly, and Roy Keane actually kept his promise to Kenny Dalglish? Well, August 1993 would have looked very different. Instead of that awkward conversation with Dalglish, Keane rocks up to Ewood Park, meets Alan Shearer properly, and becomes the final piece of what was supposed to be Blackburn's golden puzzle. Now let's talk numbers for a second. Blackburn lost the 1993-94 title to Manchester United by 8 points. 8. That's basically 3 wins, or in Roy Keane's terms, about 3 matches where he would have absolutely refused to let his team drop points. The man was what ESPN called the team because of how much he dominated matches both physically and mentally. With Keane bossing the midfield and feeding balls to prime Alan Shearer, Blackburn wouldn't just have won that title, they might have won it at a canter. We're talking about a player who would later become legendary for his complete inability to accept anything less than perfection. The partnership between Keane and Shearer could have been absolutely lethal. Shearer was already scoring goals for fun, but add Keane's service, his leadership, and most importantly, his complete refusal to let standards drop. That's dynasty material right there. But here's the really mental part. Keane's influence went way beyond just playing football. At United, he became famous for enforcing standards that became legendary. Gary Neville once said he was like Ferguson on the training pitch, someone who simply wouldn't let standards drop even for a second. Players had to arrive 30 minutes early. Everything had to be perfect, and if you weren't giving 100%, you'd know about it. At Blackburn, this same mentality would have transformed the entire club. Instead of being that team that won one title and then faded away, they could have built the kind of sustained success that comes from having someone who treats every training session like a cup final. The tactical fit would have been beautiful too. Keane's tempo control, his passing range, and his ability to drive forward from deep would have complemented Blackburn's style perfectly. With Dalglish's tactical know-how and Keane's on-field leadership, they could have been absolutely unstoppable. And here's something people don't consider: the psychological impact on other players. When you've got a genuine winner in your team, someone who demands excellence, other players step up their game. It's infectious. Blackburn wouldn't just have been signing a midfielder, they'd have been signing a winning mentality that could have lasted for years. But that's just the beginning of how mental this alternate timeline gets. Now this is where things get absolutely different, because if Roy Keane doesn't join Manchester United, the entire history of English football gets flipped on its head. Let's start with United, shall we? The 1993-94 double suddenly becomes a lot less certain without Keane dominating the midfield. But that's nothing compared to the real bombshell. The 1999 treble might never have happened. And before you say, come on, United were always going to win something, let me tell you about Turin. Champions League semi-final, second leg, 1999. United are 2-0 down to Juventus and looking absolutely hopeless. Then Roy Keane basically turned into some sort of football superhero, scored a goal, and dragged his team to one of the greatest comebacks in football history. Sir Alex Ferguson called it one of the most emphatic displays of selflessness he'd ever seen on a football field. Without Keane, that comeback doesn't happen. No Turin miracle means no Champions League final, and suddenly the most famous treble in football history vanishes into thin air. Mental, right? But it gets worse for United. Keane wasn't just a player, he was the culture. His standards became the club's standards. Players developed under his watchful eye, with Darren Fletcher later saying, "Rules about timekeeping, those traditions continue." Gary Neville admitted that. Keane made everyone around him better, not through nice words and encouragement, but through sheer refusal to let anyone slack off. Without Keane setting those standards, would those legendary players have reached the same heights? Would Ferguson have been able to maintain his iron grip on the dressing room? There's a decent chance that United's entire dynasty crumbles much earlier, and we're talking about Ferguson possibly calling it quits years before he actually did. Meanwhile, over at Blackburn, the transformation could have been complete. With Keane as the catalyst and Jack Walker's money backing them up, they might have become the destination for every ambitious player in Europe. Instead of everyone wanting to join United, the conversation might have been, when are Blackburn going to call? The Premier League itself would have looked completely different. Instead of United's dominance being broken occasionally by Arsenal, Liverpool, or City, we could have had Blackburn as a consistent powerhouse throughout the late 90s and 2000s. The entire power structure of English football shifts. Even internationally, things change. Keane's development at United shaped him into the captain who dragged Ireland to major tournaments through pure force of will. At Blackburn, would he have had the same platform? Would Ireland's golden generation have been different? The ripple effects would have been absolutely massive. Every transfer, every title race, every Champions League campaign, all of it could have been different. But there's one more twist to this story that'll absolutely do your head in. Here's the bit that'll really mess with your head. Roy Keane knew exactly what he was doing to Kenny Dalglish, and it ate him up inside. Years later, he'd admit that breaking his word was one of the hardest things he'd ever done in football. When Alan Shearer told the story, he remembered Dalglish's reaction perfectly. "You're a wee bastard." And honestly, you can see why the man was fuming. Keane later said he felt about half the size, when telling Dalglish the deal was off. This wasn't some casual business decision. This was a man who prided himself on his word, going back on a promise to one of football's most respected figures. But here's the kicker. Fast forward to 2005, and Keane's explosive MUTV interview gets him booted out of United.
I haven't really got too much to say. I would just like to thank, first of all, the fans for showing up. United fans and Celtic, thank you.
All those years of setting standards, all those trophies, all that success.